Okay, this is yet another episode of Old Man Coding with another head bashing experience with Rust. And so, to get started, I'm going to create a new project. It's going to be Rust. And it's going to be what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at rusqlite. Now, I've sort of messed around with it before, so I'm kind of sure how this is going to go. But if it goes better than I thought, then I'll be happy. But as far as I can tell, rusqlite is not a very good library. And that's surprising, considering the fact that it's basically the library in Rust to go to for SQLite. So, take a look, and if we look at the search results, we see it has an all-time high of 381,000 downloads. But the one that's named SQLite only has 42,000. So as you can see, that's like roughly 1/10 the amount of downloads that rusqlite has. So when you're looking for an SQLite library in Rust and you say, "Wow, 381,000 downloads! This must be a good package." So anyway, first thing you want to do when you want to use a package is to go to the documentation. Now, I think that Rust's documentation is great on technical details, and I think that it is god awful in terms of examples of usage. It basically, the only examples of usage you'll ever get out of rusqlite is this. And that's it. But rusqlite has an enormous number of modules and functions and structs and stuff like that this example doesn't even come close to getting into. So the reason why I say I sort of have a history of this is because I tried to create a command line program to manage an SQLite database, and I spent a good 8 hours on it, and was in the end fairly disappointed with the results I was getting. For me, 8 hours of coding in something like Node or Python or PHP, depending on the size of it, obviously, but in an application, you should you should be able to create one decent sized application, command line application, or a couple of smaller ones. But after 8 hours, I was, well, nowhere. This video is 50% me whining about rusqlite and 50% of me hoping that maybe I will have better luck this time. I know luck shouldn't matter in coding, but yet. So to start with, I'm just going to do this. Now, in an example piece of code in Rust, whoever coded this example that had result be something that's, well, what I call imported, because that's my Python roots. Or required in terms of node or whatever. Result is a very specific Rust construct that many things use. And to overwrite it in the namespace, well, whoever wrote this example code is an idiot. So I'm going to eliminate that. So we are going to take a look at this and see how to connect. Connection open in memory, question mark. Okay, that's not what I want. And I love how they don't ever give you an example of opening up a file, which is what you would do 90% of the time in SQLite. But that's all right, because we have this. Now, we need a file. So I'm just gonna hard code a path to a file that I know is an SQLite file. You don't need to know the construction of it or anything like that. It's not important. Now, you have to put a question mark here. And let me just say, for the record, how much I absolutely hate the fact that Rust makes you put in these extra little dingles here and there. These little things that tell me that the language design isn't exactly the greatest when you have to do this, or for a lot of it, Rust, you have to do an unwrap. I mean, these are all over the place in Rust code. And if you have to, like, literally put it, either this or question mark behind everything you do, then as a language design, you're doing something wrong. This should be explicit. Dot unwrap should be explicit. It should be the edge cases that that should have something additional like this. For example, the reason why you have an unwrap is so that you don't have to do, like match, con on, okay, blah. It's about as exhaustive as you're gonna get there, motherfucker. So anyways, that's why unwrap exists, is so that you don't have to do this. It just automatically thinks that, oh, if you have an unwrap, it's gonna be okay. But why do this? Why didn't instead they just make the behavior of unwrap be, oh, okay, yeah, most of the time it's going to work. And then if you need a match, do something like that. Or match wrap. Or something. But they didn't do that. Instead, they assumed that there was going to be a match for error conditions. And then had to plug in a .unwrap thing in order to, so that coders wouldn't have to constantly match error codes, when instead you should just have the common case be, no, everything's pretty much going to be okay. If it's not, we'll panic. But just in case, if you want to match it, then we'll give you a whatever, a match function or something. So then you can then go on and do a match statement. But no, they didn't. They designed it pretty much the question mark and the .unwrap. Pretty much they designed the language back-assward from what it should be. So pretty much after every single function call, you have to put something, or question mark or .unwrap or something. And that just clutters up your code. It's bad design. But anyways, so we have a connection open. Let's save that, and then do a edit configuration. Okay, we'll just run this thing. And blah blah blah. Just making sure I don't need any of this. Then we wait for it to compile. Huh. Use time spec. Similar path exists standard time. Cannot use the question mark operator in a function that returns. So first off, let's get rid of this until we need it. And then I like to rebuild. And then it finished compiling. Great. So, I'm just going to set up here a database connection. If I can find it. There we go. Okay. So let's select something from it. And there's an execute, and then there's a prepare. Let's just do that. Okay, so let's select oh yeah, why not? So let's point. That's ID var name value from I take that back. That's going to be an awful lot of. But let's do instance status. There we go. Then they want us to create a structure, which I personally think, again, clutters up the program. But for the purposes of this example, just getting it to work, but in this case, we're just going to say and string label is string, and status is a string. Instant ID, table, and status. And then we'll just do all right. So let's run this puppy. Ah! So, in the example, which I just copied from, just used a question mark. It doesn't like that. I have to say that I have the most tenuous grasp of the difference between a question mark and an unwrap. Again, I have to change all these to unwrap, despite the fact that the example says use a question mark. And even though the example says do this, although technically this should be okay. So guess what? Just gonna do that. Okay. We got instant ID. And we got a label. And we got the status. Okay. So, yay? Now, Rust option and result types might feel a bit cumbersome and verbose to work with. To make it easier and less verbose to use them, trait-based exception handling. Operator, which is a compiler assisted rewrite of expressions around the question mark characters. is the unary suffix operator, which can be placed on expression to unwrap the value on the left-hand side while propagating any. So the question mark is, as far as I can tell, the same as the unwrap. Okay, Stack Overflow doesn't actually. And I love how DuckDuckGo doesn't just send you to the Rust documentation. So we have the question mark. We have the try exclamation point macro. And we have unwrap, all seemingly doing pretty much the same thing. And the Rust book doesn't even have unwrap as a first order thing in its book. So you can't just do a find on it. Considering unwrap and the question mark is being used in 90% of all function calls. So, match works well enough, but it can be a bit verbose. Yeah, unwrap will panic. Which again makes me wonder what the difference is between unwrap and question mark, which seems to do the same thing. This is where I start pounding my head on the desk. Blah, blah, blah. To unwrap the variable on the left hand side of the. Yeah. So you got the question mark, you got the try. And you have the unwrap. All of which seem to do the same thing, except that question marks here don't work. Cannot use the question mark operator in a function that returns. That makes no sense whatsoever. Well, let's do something. Let's what if I cannot use the question mark operator in a function that returns I-32. So basically what I'm getting out of this is that you can't use the question mark anywhere that does anything. What the bloody point of it if you can't? But more to the point, so evidently in the documentation for rusqlite, this works, but when I try it, it doesn't. So either this is woefully out of date for the modern Rust version, which I believe, or nobody bothered to actually test this. As a matter of fact, let's do this. So why does this work? Oh, because it's using result from rusqlite. See, this is why you never overwrite major things in the namespace. Okay, that worked. Just using and putting result there where result is being used by so much else in Rust. It's just the act of a madman or an idiot and leads to confusion. Why do you do it? So, can we do this now? Yes, we can. I still have an immense struggle in figuring out what the difference is between a question mark and an unwrap. But hey, by the way, if you hear a sucking sound, that's me vaping. So we got that working, and let's you see, I really hate having hard code structs. Because what if I didn't want the status? I mean, I suppose I could like set this to like null or none or double quote or something like that. Fact is, I'd still have data hanging out in status that I shouldn't need. I mean, still don't know the difference between question mark and unwrap and why unwrap works and question mark doesn't. I'm thinking it's because the question mark, while dot unwrap executes a panic if it fails, question mark somehow propagates upwards if it doesn't. But that's only a guess. Certainly, none of the documentation, and frankly, Okay. So the question mark is basically if it hits an error condition, then it returns error E as opposed to panicking. But again, this syntactic sugar shouldn't exist because they're forcing you to either implicitly or explicitly do this every single time you run a function. And that's dumb. You should just assume the function works, unless it doesn't. And then, if there's any chance that the error might happen, like in a file open, might not happen because hello.txt might not be there, then you say dot check or dot match or something, and then go through this bullshit. Otherwise, assume that it works. And if it doesn't, panic. It's just that simple. And I don't understand why they didn't do that. Only a crazy person would make somebody type in a question mark or a dot unwrap or do this match thing for every single damn method call you do. Why would such an insane person do that? So anyway, mapped rows, which evidently gives you an iterator, which for each row it returns an OK instance status with this. Which to me is absolutely, completely, and utterly insane. There's a collection called HashMap, which has key value of pairs and the key could be, I don't know, instance ID or label or status. And the value would be what the instance ID is, what the label is, what the status is. And then just have a vector of those returned from a query. So, let's go back to our web page and see if somebody agrees with me. Wow, that's even less useful. Open memory. That row one. Connection prepare. from rows ref. Example. Just still this. Nope. I would say this is not what I'm looking for. So, frankly, it should be like let rows equals statement query and that's it. So let's go back to rusqlite. And then statement query execute the prepared statement returning a handle to the resulting rows. So rows, while let sum row equals rows.next. It maps a function over the resulting rows, where the function returns the result with error type implementing standard convert from error. So errors could be unified. Doesn't help me. Query named, I don't care. So let's select sense ID, label status from sense status. Okay. Names is a new vector, but let's do statuses. So while let some row, again, I don't really understand the context of the word some. Row, why doesn't this just return? Why doesn't this turn a vector? Just a plain Jane vector. Why does it have to be some? And if there are no rows returned, then it should just return an empty vector. This makes no sense to me, and this is what makes me rage quit, well, rusqlite, but also Rust. Because Rust leads to the kind of thinking where this isn't just a vector. Why does it have to be a sum? More importantly, if this is an iterator of rows, why does it return a row in a sum? Why doesn't it just return the row? And if not, then it returns a none or a null. Oh, that's right, because Rust doesn't want a null. Rust doesn't need a null. This is where I start pounding my head on the table. And I mean pounding it hard. As a demonstration. Makes no sense to me whatsoever. But more importantly, this should return a vector of rows. And each row should have a hash map of values with this. And why it doesn't is completely beyond me. So Is there a way to turn this into a vector of hash map values? And the hash map represents the key being the column name and the value being obviously the value returned. The problem is Rust doesn't have a null. So if any of your columns returns a null, then what do you translate that into? A none? I honestly don't know. But also, if you do this, and then fill HM with values, and do that. Consider giving statuses the explicit type standard vec standard collections hash map kv where the parameter k is specified. Which is So why was it complaining? Cannot infer type for K, and yet the Rust documentation, which we see right here, says that you can do this. Need a mutable anyways for the hash map, but still cannot infer type for K. Why not? It says you can. I borrowed value doesn't live long enough. Unusable row, don't care. Value borrowed here after move. Dropped here while still borrowed. So even if I could, from the query, from the prepared, get the column names, even if I could construct a hash map with a key of the column name and the value of the value returned from the query, and even if I could push it into value borrowed here after move. Why? Value moved here in previous iteration of the loop. I'm instantiating a new HM in each loop. So I don't care if it's dropped. I don't care if it's moved. I mean, yes, I'm pushing it into statuses, but I'm pushing a clone of it in. Well, it's been fun, but the hour's almost up, and yet once again, I'm rage quitting because Rust makes no sense. I'm instantiating a new variable. I'm inserting a value into it. Then I am pushing a clone into a vector of statuses, leaving HM ready to be recycled and reused in this block. I am not borrowing here. Move occurs because HM has type standard collections, hash map, blah 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 blah, which does not implement the copy trait. Why does it implement the copy trait? And more importantly, what the fuck is a copy trait? All variables should have a copy trait, because you need to copy variables all the damn time. So, yeah. Yet once again, Rust's back-assward design makes no sense and leaves you, after an hour of coding, with no good solutions. And a good solution is not having a structure for every goddamn thing you want to select. It's just not a good option. There are times when you want to iterate through rows. I get that. You don't want to return a vector of rows, especially if you have a table that returns 1,000,000 values, or a query that returns 1,000,000 values. You want to step through it. I get that. But even if you want to step through it, rows.next should return a hash map. And it don't. So yeah. Thus endeth another episode of Old Man Coding, with the Old Man Coder completely wrecked by the design decisions in Rust. And it very well could be that I'm just too stupid to understand this stuff. But I honestly think that the design patterns in Rust, it's like the designer said, okay, what's the exact opposite of what makes sense to a coder? Let's do that. So, anyways, thus endeth the episode. Thank you very much for watching, if you got this far. And I'll talk to you later. Have a good day.